There are and some great pumpkin muffins that I made today. That's all right. So feel free to grab some refreshments as we get started. First of all, what a gorgeous sunset. Actually, the third night in a row, we created to a technicolor sunset. Reminds us how lucky we are to live at the It's a little warm lately, but this control path. I want to open by acknowledging that this is Rosh Hashanah, one of the two most important holidays for our Jewish neighbors and friends. When we scheduled this, we were not paying attention. We'll be more observant next year in every sense of that word. But a number of folks who would love to have joined us are only to be here because they're on all of them. This, of course, is the new year in the Jewish calendar, a time of reflection, good for all of us, whatever faith or lack of faith, to observe that there are always new beginnings. We're going to talk a little bit about new beginnings, but I want to have this be interactive, and I actually want to start with that as a little bit of a level setting, both for the audience, but also for panelists. To get a sense, I suspect, both knowing many of you, but also just by the nature of things, that you are a better informed group of citizens than average, right? I mean, this is a somewhat self-selected audience, even though in our announcements and our mailers, we encourage people who maybe aren't paying attention to come and to learn about how to pay attention and why that's important. Giving a mailer in the mail goes right to the circular round file in many cases. But let's find out where you get your news. So how many subscribe to the Star News, either online or in the physical newspaper? That's frankly, a higher percentage than the actual subscriptions to the Star News is really basically a third of the households at any given time who are subscribing to our local newspaper. How many subscribe online or physically or both to the Los Angeles Times? Well, that's quite a few. Now, of course, at one time, the Los Angeles Times had a reporter simply assigned to Pasadena. And then it was a reporter assigned to San Gabriel Valley. And now I don't think there's anyone with that specific beat. How many of you, your main source of information about Pasadena? Well, let me ask a couple more. How many of you regularly see Pasadena Now, which is just online? Well, Andre, you should feel pretty good about that. And I feel pretty good about that as well, as we talk. There are other publications. So what other resources do you get news from? We'll hold social media for a moment, but there's Colorado Boulevard, there's Pasadena Weekly, there's television news, there's KPCC, now called LAist. Where do you get your?
I was gonna say that.
So what other useful sources? And there's also a group called Local News of Pasadena that does online reporting. Where other than the Star News, LA Times, and Pasadena Now, do you get information? LAist. We're talking about Pasadena here now.
Colorado Boulevard.
Okay. How many Colorado Boulevard readers are there? Okay. How many LAist listeners? Okay. So in some sense, tonight, we'll be a little bit preaching to the choir. There are in District 2, 20,000 residents. 7,000 of them are registered to vote. And this is a great turnout, all things considered. It's Rosh Hashanah, it's a Tuesday night, it's 7 o'clock. I don't know what's on Netflix, I guess, whatever you want, Netflix, right? The Dodgers, exactly. But yes, Jimmy Kimmel is, but I think what will be done by then, I guarantee. But it's the 18,000 people that aren't here that I'm actually worried about. Because I think most of you are interested in what's happening, understand why it's important, and it's frankly a little depressing, the local media landscape. I'm gonna start with this, and then we're gonna get into the panel. When I was growing up, not particularly happy with the Star News. But it's like so many things, you don't miss it till it's gone. I asked the education reporter when I was in high school, who's now retired. So when you were at the Star News, how many folks worked on the news side? So there was advertising people, there were printing, they actually printed it there in that building on Colorado. He told me, he counted them up, there were 35 reporters and editors covering Pasadena every single day. That building was open 7 days a week. They had a reporter assigned full-time to Pasadena City Hall, not just to show up or to watch on Zoom the meeting once a week. But that reporter was asking questions, digging into stories, writing investigative pieces that help people understand what was going on behind the scenes. Just one reporter just for the City Hall. There was one reporter just for our public schools. There were crime reporters. There were culture, entertainment, science. There was a science reporter. We have a Caltech and JPL. 35 people every single day covering what was happening just in our little city, which was smaller then. It was 120,000, now it's 140,000. By contrast, and we get into this, no, the Star News, the LA Times, asking them how, none of them have anywhere near, I'm just gonna do this. None of them have anywhere near the resources, which means you're not getting the depth and scope of coverage that used to be routine. And fewer people are actually paying attention to what is being produced. Because we are now bombarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with all kinds of information, advertising, and social media that has little or nothing to do with our community. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay attention to what's happening in the world or what's happening in our nation or what's happening in our state. But it is, I believe, a deeply problematic challenge if people don't know what's going on in their own home house. So as many of you know, because I knocked on your doors, I knocked on more than 5,000 doors during my campaign. I stopped counting at 5,000. And I talked to many of you, and I had some wonderful in-depth conversations with many of you. Some of whom voted for me, some of whom did vote for me, some of whom didn't vote. And that's the ones I worry about the most. And what I found were people were deeply thoughtful. They cared deeply about their neighbors in their community. But with the exception of this cross-section, people were deeply ignorant about the first thing about their city government. They thought the mayor was the person that runs things down at City Hall. They didn't know that our mayor is a part-time person who presides in the city council, and our city manager is actually the person who runs our city government day to day. When I told people we had $1.5 billion budget, they were stunned. $1.5 billion for Pasadena? That's unbelievable. Just basic kind of facts about the town. How do you have a democracy if the only thing that people can rely upon is the political propaganda they get from the candidates at election time. Less people are informed, and I'll conclude with this. Thomas Jefferson, who was a great believer in the First Amendment. Thomas Jefferson was not a poet, but he said, if you want a people who are both ignorant and free, you want something that never has been and never will be. So that's our challenge tonight is how do we rebuild lines of communication? We're not going to go back 30 years and have the Star News with 35 reporters. How do we go forward and create the avenues so that we have not only an opportunity to learn the facts about what's going on in our community, but to have the opportunity for debate, for discourse, for differing viewpoints, for the back and forth that makes it possible for us to find common ground. So that's our challenge tonight. We have a fantastic panel. All my first choices said yes. So we'll begin with Matt Pierce, who's our only non-Pasadenan. Matt was 12 years a reporter for the Los Angeles Times, and now is the policy director for an organization amazingly called Rebuild Local News. And so, like many journalists today, instead of working for a publication, he has his own publication that observes what's going on out there in the media and how it's affecting our democracy and our ability to talk to each other in these polarized times. So thank you for coming and joining us today. One of our, in Japan, they have national treasures. These are people like the best potter, traditional potter, the person that makes the most beautiful sort of carpenter. This is our local treasure, Andre Coleman, who spent a number of years covering our city on the Pasadena Weekly. He's now the editor of Pasadena Now. Most of you, as we saw, rely on Pasadena Now. Andre writes Political Gumbo, which really takes, it's a really, one of the few places where people are sort of not just talking about the news, but thinking about the news. So Andre is joining us.
I don't get that one. So.
Lisa Derderian is the essence of a public servant. She has been with the city how many years now?
22 years.
22 years. And so she cut her teeth on the fire department and communication there. We want to know right now what's happening when there's an emergency. And so she cut her teeth on that. She is now in charge of communications for the city. This is, I'm going to separate myself from her for a moment and give you Rick Cole, City Council member's view. I have been advocating since I took office 9 months ago to give her more staff and more power. Here's the way it works at Pasadena City Hall. We have a number of folks in each department who are in charge of communicating for the library, communicating for Parks and Rec, communicating for the police department, communicating for the fire department, communicating for Pasadena Water and Power. They all do a good job, but nobody's in charge of all of it. I think that Lisa will not say anything about this because she has a boss. And I'm one of the 8 people who are his boss. So I am hoping that we can have greater synergy for our communication effort, because I think individually we do a good job. Collectively, I think we're missing some opportunity. And then Victor Suarez is the person who we're going to rely on the most tonight to talk about the most significant emerging change in our world, which is social media. TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, on and on, Nextdoor. All of these sources which have kind of eaten alive the old media. And now most people in America, especially younger people,
are relying on that for their information. And that is both a huge opportunity and an extremely scary thing for those of us who are older and trying to figure out how this is all going to work. Victor is the Deputy Communications Director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance and has a long history of working for causes and in the political realm, strategic communication. So these four folks are going to have a lively discussion. We're going to then, as we always do, give you an opportunity to feed me questions for them in writing while we're having the discussion. And then we will end in time for direct discussion, for you to make a comment or to ask a question. Are we all on the same page? Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Matt, because essentially you have a big draw overview. What happened to local media? Is Pasadena better off, worse off, or right in the middle of the pack when it comes to local news?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Hi.
All right, if you can't hear me, I'll just yell. So local journalism in the United States over the past century used to be funded by local advertising. So your local car dealer, your local department store, your local businesses were paying quite a lot of money to advertise their businesses in your community news organization. And it's those dollars from those entrepreneurs and those stores that help fund tens of thousands of local journalism jobs in our communities. Fast forward to today, those advertising dollars are going to Menlo Park and Mountain View, the headquarters of Google and Meta. Advertising has migrated onto platforms that are powered by surveillance, scraping your data when you're going online, if you're someone who goes online. This allows your local businesses, your local car dealers, department stores, if they're still local, to target advertising to users of services like Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. And this is massively profitable, but not for local news organizations, because the dollars that once funded all those reporters, those photographers, those editors aren't there anymore. And the platforms that are breaking in those advertising dollars don't themselves employ journalists. They are services that host journalists who put content on them. Those services don't necessarily feature local news. They feature what algorithms make attractive to users. And, you know, candidly, I think one of the problems that someone like me as a journalist is in is that we have discovered in this modern era that a lot of people are not passionate about very hard, dry, investigative reporting about complicated matters that are not very quickly understandable. So we have, on one hand, the consumer problem, which is that, you know, we as journalists, at least in the 20th century style newsroom, a newspaper, a TV station, a radio station, we have been producing a lot of journalism that consumers are kind of telling us that they don't want anymore. But also at the same time, we kind of have a monopoly problem, which is that we have gigantic tech companies that are charging sometimes monopoly rates on advertising of those small businesses. We're not sharing that money with the people who are creating content on their platforms. So we have every possible problem. And I'll just give you one detail to sort of illustrate where we are right now in 2025, which is, all right, Nielsen ratings, you may know the name Nielsen, it measures how much people are watching TV programs, you know, in the living room. Today, what is the #1 Nielsen rated channel on living room TVs in America? Any guesses? YouTube. That's right. And everything's on YouTube. It's not necessarily true. So, how is Pasadena faring? I think Pasadena is kind of representative of a lot of different communities where you have struggling legacy organization combined with some kind of upstart organizations that are trying to figure out what works digitally for doing local news. One of the challenges that I deal with in my current job, which is working on public policies to support local journalism, is that the innovation that we see from content creators and journalists who are platforms is that the number of jobs that are being created, or the number of roles, or the number of journalists who are being sustained on these new platforms is much smaller than the number of journalists that your traditional newspaper or TV station supported. So when we look at places like Pasadena, what you sort of see now in 2025 as part of the conversation is kind of a 3 or 4-legged stool on how to rebuild our local news ecosystems, which is a combination of innovation and hard work, figuring out what people actually want today and how they want to get it, how to figure out how to meet the audience where they are, how to get philanthropy and community businesses supporting the really essential community news and information that perhaps can't be supported by a traditional marketplace. And then my piece of this is public policy, dealing with issues like antitrust, for example, in the big tech space, but also in public subsidies around the world. Advanced democracies, almost all of them, spend far, far more on public taxpayer dollars on supporting the creation of high quality community media. The United States is near rock bottom. And I think that's a mistake. And I think we make the case to lawmakers that there's an opportunity here to create smart public policies to try to support people who are doing innovative work in the community and trying to build local news for the 21st century. And so I have a lot of optimism. This is why I do this instead of journalism now, but it's very hard. And it also requires a lot of conversation about hearing what people like you want to get out of your local media, and also what you're willing to support if somebody like me comes to you either as a voter or to a city council person or a state senator or congressperson to say, we think that there are publicly supported programs that make sense and are First Amendment friendly and allow us to have thriving independent media that nonetheless is supported and viable enough to give us the quality information to allow us to be a thriving democracy and allow us to have a community with each other, see each other as human beings. So
Matt, we'll come back to some of the solutions midway through our conversation, but I want to start about, again, the media landscape. And Victor, the Star News era that I described certainly had a lot of firepower, but also it was pretty mainstream, right? If you had a different point of view, you could write a letter to the editor and probably it would get published, but not necessarily. Now it's easier for dissenting voices, for also niche audiences, right? The pickleball players. There's a phenomenon. One of my friends was in charge of the pickleballers that played at the Altadena Country Club. There was a dozen or 20 of them. And now there's 3,000 of them on the Altadena Survivors Network that grew out of her little 12 to 20 people who were in contact with each other because they were fire victims. It just exploded. So share your observations about the complexity and the upside of the opportunity for more voices to be heard and for people to get information that they truly want, that they may or may not have gotten from the mainstream media in the past.
Those are all good points and well taken. I think, I see social media as a double-edged sword in a lot of ways, as somebody who's chronically online, and does their work online primarily. There's a lot of opportunity in terms of what Rick mentioned in terms of organizing. I think a lot of us who spend time online, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, there's a thriving Pasadena Reddit, if you're a part of it, saw, particularly during the fires, right? We saw a lot of mutual aid efforts, a lot of donation drives, right? And a lot of self-organizing that happened. And so I think there's an incredible, opportunity there that could be tapped, right? And so like Rick mentioned, there's a lot of self-organizing that is happening. And so I think that is a great thing. I think another example I will give, there's an amazing, Pasadena for All, mutual aid group, if folks are familiar, they do houseless outreach every weekend. And it started on the Pasadena Reddit. This is somebody threw in a comment and was like, hey, I want to go hand out water on a hot day to our houseless neighbors. Anybody want to join me? And now it's like a thriving 5-year organization with like over 100 like active volunteers. And so I think in terms of using social media as a place for either dissenting voices or for folks to get organized, there is a lot of potential, but there is also a lot of danger and downside, right? Because sometimes what tends to happen is that the loudest voices, what can seem like a giant movement on the line, sometimes can't fill up a room, right? And so I think sometimes, there is polarizing ideas, right, that might seem like they have a giant base of support, but when it comes time to like do on the ground organizing or affect policy change, you find that there actually isn't that much support. And so I think, we can't always believe the hype that we see online. I think sometimes, there is a lot of amazing organizing that can happen, that can translate into on the ground change and efforts, but I think sometimes it can also be a whole lot of nothing.
So, Andre, you are at the vortex of all of this every day, trying to cover a big city with a very tiny set of resources. How is that going, and what are the bright spots, and what are your frustrations?
Let me start with this. You talked about 35 people at the Pasadena Star News.
Mhm.
When I was at the Pasadena, I started my career at the Pasadena Star News in 1987 in the sports department. We had 12 sports writers. In that one department, there were 12 people. They have one Pasadena reporter. So that shows you how it's going. The bright spots are news can be instant at a place like Pasadena Now.
And I've been reminded we should talk more into the microphone so everyone in the back can hear.
I'm sorry, Pasadena Now is tailor-made for a big earthquake or something like the Eden Fire. Because we can get information out like that. Unfortunately, where it goes bad is half the audience doesn't trust us. Half the audience thinks we're part of the conspiracy. Half the audience thinks we work at City Hall. Half the audience thinks we have a horse in the fight. So if you're telling the truth to people who've already made up their mind, you're lying. It's like a divorce. Can't do anything about it. It's just over. Is what it is. What the other areas where we go bad is, and this is to piggyback on the social media thing, is that everybody on Facebook thinks they're a reporter. They're not. Everybody on Instagram thinks they're a reporter. They're not. Journalism is a specific thing. It is a collection of truthful facts presented to the community for information. It's not for, hey, I found this great link at popsicle.com. A month ago, I don't know if people are aware of it, over the weekend, the president hadn't been seen in several days. There was a story that went out that the president was dying or was dead. And people were jumping on it and reporting on TikTok, Facebook, X, Instagram. A couple of the TV news stations actually picked it up. Where is he? There is no fact fix. Journalism is a collection of facts. It is a specific thing. And unfortunately, we're at a time in our society where people believe they can be lawyers. They believe they can be journalists. They believe they can be a better council member. Simply because they have opinions. It's not the opinions that we have the issue with. It is when you jump on and you go breaking news, you type a bunch of stuff. And somebody who knows what they're talking about is looking at it and they go, okay, all of that is just wrong. And then we put out a story that's right, based on what we understand. And the response in the incorrect thing is, they're lying. That makes it hard to present information, so it gets better when people come back to a point of where they seek information. And they're not looking for the conspiracy. Everybody is not manager Jim Rockford. Everybody is not a secret agent who has already solved the problem. So, that's a big part of the problem, but I think on the plus side is that we have more information at our fingertips than ever before. And that if we can get back to a point where we seek truth and we seek information, will it come back to what it used to be? No. Can it continue? Journalism will always continue in some form or another. It absolutely can continue. I don't know about the paper product. I don't even know if the product presented by Pasadena Nash, if that will always be the top way to do it. But it will continue.
Lisa, I'm gonna acknowledge that you have the hardest job up here, because you have two jobs. One is to put the best foot forward for our city, give people information they need to know. We're talking about raising electric rates. Here are the facts. Here's where you can participate. We're having a planning session about the future of North Lake. Here's where you can go and register your opinion. We're having the celebration of the young child at Brookside Park this Saturday, and bring your kids, and there's great resources. So you have that job. But you also have the challenge that how do you get that message out to people when everyone is expecting you to give the right information at the right time to them, and if they miss it, that's your fault. So how are you navigating this really challenging environment?
Thank you for the kind words, first of all. We have 18 departments in the city, so that's a lot. So trying to keep up with what is going on with every department is a challenge, but.
If it's a challenge for the public information, I'll have to
Good challenge,
take
good
it out
challenge,
to public.
a good challenge. But our DC's hiding back there too, but Pasadena Media, George Filardo, Rick Renton, he's a tremendous resource for the city of Pasadena. But my job, we are a news source, so, whether it's breaking news, and we get it out on social media, or if it's,
Get closer to the mic.
oh, sorry, if it's breaking news and we need to get it out right away, we'll put it on social media. We have several days before a planned event, we'll send out a press release. But we have to look at all of our demographics, from the little old lady in Pasadena to, the little young millennial that want instant news right away on social media. So we'll get something out to radio, where people listen to that in the cars. We're always hearing on Pasadena Now, how they get the information out, and that's where people are getting their news and information. We have our website, we have KPAS, so we try to look at the different demographics in town. My job was emergency management, and we had to think about in an emergency how, when this became reality during the 8 fires. You got, again, the older audience that you may need to go knock on their door because they're not gonna be able to get news and information, to get them to evacuate, whereas you have, again, the other generation where you get the social media out there, tell them to leave right away. There was a survey done after the fires where we were told we put out too much information. People are overwhelmed, they're trying to process what is going on in a state of, emergency, panic, where they're evacuating their homes, some lost their homes. So lessons learned, you put out too much information sometimes too, to where you lose that audience. So my challenge is finding that happy medium. I'm a little type A, so 24/7, I'm usually at my phone, at my computer, getting information out. I live in town, so I always say I have pride of ownership. I think I work harder because I live in town, and so I want to always make sure that, I'm getting the right information out, make my, community proud there.
I'm gonna ask a somewhat uncomfortable question, because I think we shouldn't gloss over it. And that is the balance between the official voice of the city of Pasadena and crazy cat videos, right? Which are we gonna pay attention to, right? The dull but important voice of the city government, which is basically, eat your spinach, right? We're gonna be doing something on your block and you should pay attention because we're gonna come through and trim your trees or whatever. And the fact that there's this clickbait, phenomena that we are all drawn to, the cat video, sometimes darker information out there. The latest thing that Donald Trump did or didn't do,
I can check.
and so how do you strike the balance between trying to get people's attention and being responsible and not sensational?
So when it's factual, we'll put it out there, again, that breaking news information. But we also have a business community that we need to support. So that's where we'll turn to more of the fun videos or the cat videos, as we call it. The ones that will hopefully attract people to the new businesses, to support our economic development divisions. We have council members at events that it's important that we know that they're out in the field, they're out talking to constituents such as tonight. So it's that balance of, we have the Instagram, X, next door. And then on top of that, it's similar to what you're discussing is we get the comments and we can't turn off comments. I mean, we can, but that's not, as a city, we don't want to do that. So we get some very horrific comments online sometimes that we have to, again, filter through. We'll respond once with factual information and then that's it. We leave it alone after that. Yeah, because then it gets into a back and forth. You see that on Nextdoor, you see that on Facebook. So again, our job is we gotta look at the fluff, the fun stuff versus, the serious and try to get the community to understand that if we're putting it out there as a breaking news story, then we mean business. We're serious about the topic at hand.
So I work for a 33-year-old controller for the city of Los Angeles who was elected 2.5 years ago with more votes than any candidate in the history of Los Angeles for any office. And social media powered his rise from obscurity to that triumph. And he recently did a video in which he said the city of Los Angeles is going broke. And so if you're wondering why the city looks like Dookie, now you know. That's not my style. It's not Lisa Derderian's style, but that got 100,000 views. So how do you balance that? We'll leave that question hanging. So Andre, you want to get into the conversation?
Political gumbo. Take a resource where you can make people think, where you can jab, where you can turn the gun towards yourself, because you know what you're saying is going to not make everybody happy. But it's a chance to say words like bro, and things like that, and news should make people think. Now, when I was at the Weekly, I could take 3 days to write 1,000 words. And I could do prose that was so amazing that people were like, you should get a Pulitzer. They look at passing it out and they're like, what happened to you? It's because now I have 5 minutes. I don't have 3 days anymore. Before, it was literally our mantra at the Weekly was we would look at Star News all week and we would go, now it's our turn. And we'd put our feet up and we would go, we'll talk about it on Wednesday after the paper's out. And then we would meet over copious amounts of beer. And we would go, let's do it this way. Or look, they missed this big story right in the middle of this. They gave us an opening. Let's take the story back. So we would do 1,000 words, a 1,000-word cover story, and the attitude was, the story's over. There's nothing left to be said here unless there's a follow-up story. And that worked. For so long, Weekly was an amazing outlet. But nobody has 3 days because people now are so used to right now.
And Victor, that brings up the idea of the hot take. We just had this. We had a national tragedy. We had a political figure murdered on film, and we've been convulsed ever since with opinions and controversy and, how do we, approach these kind of terribly divisive, complicated, or nuanced issues, without going off the cliff?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question. I think part of the problem is that
Probably a billion.
really, yeah, exactly. Part of the problem is that social media algorithms are designed to reward the polarizing, the rage bait, right? The thing that is gonna drive engagement. And what drives engagement? It's the controversy. Because that means you're engaging with the content. That means you're spending more time on these platforms, which means more ad dollars, right? More ad revenue for these social media platforms. So I think that by design, right, this isn't an accident that we're living in a polarized era, an era where we're seeing, some of the more extreme voices, right, rising to prominence. It's by design. And I think, Lisa's point is really well taken, that it's a balance. There's certain issues that, were served best by addressing in a balanced way. But I think there's other issues where we can have fun. I'm a big fan of Kenneth Mejia's content. He takes
My former boss, I retired in June, to devote more time to this job.
where he takes things that he takes an issue like the city budget, which, let's face it, it's not the most exciting issue. And he made it interesting, right? And so I think there's opportunities to meet people where they're at. And sometimes that means jumping on a silly trend to explain something that is a little boring or something that's not as engaging, right? And so I think it's a balance, right? I think there's a space to be serious, but I think sometimes with issues that normally get no attention, there's an opportunity to jump on a trend and maybe have a little bit of a hot take. I think that could be appropriate then.
I got, if you don't mind me telling you, I got 7 phone calls today, and you wanna know what the question was?
Yes.
You wanna know, Chris? What do I do if the rapture is actually happening today? I got 7 people, locals, who called me.
We wanna know.
Well, they're asking the wrong person, because the answer was, if you hear harp music, I've run. That was the answer. But
I shared with Frank Warner, my favorite joke from my old pastor, who said, if you're over 50 and you wake up and you have no aches and pains, check your pulse, you're probably in heaven.
But that was the #1 trending topic today, was the rapture. So, I mean, it says a lot. I mean, at a time when the First Amendment is threatened, arguably, depending on which side you're on, an assassination, people thought, a number of people, that they were gonna be taken up into the sky today, and they called Pasadena now to know what they should do about it.
That's a kind of a backhanded compliment.
It is, but I'm not jumping up in the air and grabbing you, that's for sure.
Matt, let's get you back in the conversation. How does this fit into the larger, what are the good ideas that other communities are pursuing to try to not necessarily go backwards to a time that is impossible to recapture, but to go forward to a time where there is opportunity for people to get timely, reliable information and the opportunity to have civil discourse where there's disagreement.
This is a $1 trillion question. So Google and Meta, their market capitalizations are now in the trillions. So this is inflation happening now. So we're raising the stakes. So starting with the big, my organization, we've supported in the current antitrust litigation at the federal level, the breakup of Google. We think that, one company or two companies having this much control over how we interact with each other isn't healthy. It's not healthy for small businesses and how they advertise. It's not healthy for news organizations, content creators, and how they have to navigate with these platforms. It's not healthy for any one entity to have that much control over how we interact with each other and how we get information. So that's just the biggest thing. But more modestly, a lot of the public policies that we work on are about how do we direct public dollars to the production of more community news. And so we've worked on several issues that take different pathways to answer that question. One concept that we worked on that's now been implemented in the state of Illinois are journalist employment tax credits. The idea being that a certain percent of journalist wage can be written off of a news organization's taxes or received as a refundable credit by a nonprofit news organization. Essentially, to sort of use a Moneyball analogy here, if we think the problem is that there is not enough community news being reported in our communities, we need more reporters. But if we need more reporters, we need to make it more affordable to employ them because the news organizations don't have the money to do that. So that's one of the concepts that we've worked on that Illinois has implemented. The state of New York is in the process of.
It's a lot less problematic than direct funding of news agencies, because then there's always the question, which ones do you fund? And what is their responsibility to serve the whole public?
Exactly, and we're very anxious about the idea of, for example, an executive branch, like, you know, a governor, a mayor, a president, anybody like that, picking and choosing which news outlets that should get the public dollars. Like, that scares the daylights out of me. And we're worried that, you know, even if we have responsible public leaders, as we do in many places, you know, you don't want the idea of just like hiding in the back of some journalist's head that if they write something a little bit too honest, that they're not gonna have a job. So we think the tax code is honestly something that can be very helpful in supporting journalism. And in fact, the fact that we have the 501c3 portion of the US code is something that has actually allowed a lot of philanthropic investment in community journalism, because donors can get tax deductibility already to contribute to a nonprofit newsrooms in their area. And so this is something that public media had known for a long time. They've been very successful at those membership drives, which I know people found really annoying. Like, if you have been annoyed by a public radio membership drive in your lifetime, you look at Congress and the presidential administration defunding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The fact that KPCC is still on the air is because of the work that they have been doing, annoying all of you, to giving them money over the years. But the thing that helped make that work for large and institutional givers was tax deductibility. And the tax code is great. It's kind of like the open protocol of, you know, governance and how we spend public dollars, because it's decentralized. It doesn't require a public official deciding which news outlets, whose viewpoints that they like. So those are some of the policies that we like to explore, play around with, and see, are there safe ways of doing this that are efficient and effective and can be kind of a Goldilocks target of, you're not trying to exclude anybody who is kind of a bona fide news outlet, while also not, you know, subsidizing cranks. And I will tell you that's a delicate balance, while honoring the First Amendment, while also trying to carve out people who are genuine. But California is actually a state that's been kind of a leader on some of these early ideas. There is a state program, the California Local News Fellowship, that's publicly funded. It's run through the UC Berkeley School of Journalism, and it places early career journalists in communities all across the state in their community newsrooms. And they are essentially university employees, technically, but they're really reporting local journalism for these newsrooms. And for those newsrooms, basically free labor. And it's funded by the public. And so that's like another concept that allows taxpayers to support the actual production of quality work in a community where otherwise that newsroom couldn't support that job. And I like that because you could actually measure a result and point to that journalist. It's a person with a name. You can see the stories that they have produced. whether it's, written story or video or podcast. You can see the awards that they've won. You can see the legislation that their work inspired, the investigations that their work inspired, and you can go back to the taxpayers and go back to the lawmakers and say, you funded this, and these are those results. And if you're not happy with the results, then, maybe we're not gonna do that anymore. But that program just got renewed by the California legislature this year, so, we're seeing some really promising results on that front. So those are the kind of things that are possible. We need a lot more, to be honest, for this to make a really big impact in our communities, but I think we're in the early stages of some interesting stuff here, and I think we're trying to be flexible about like what these policies could look like, and also what the future of journalism needs to look like, because again, like part of the problem here isn't just funding the journalism. Part of the problem is that every journalist is competing with Netflix and YouTube for people's attention. We're competing with the city, If the city's an information producer, content creators are information producers, everybody's an information producer. So it's the single most competitive market that we have. So even the public subsidies will only take you up to a certain point. You actually have to be good.
I have a question about subsidies. Can they be used to hire an ad?
An ad person?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it depends on the policy, it depends how it's written. So advertising, can we nerd out on advertising for like 1 moment here?
Before we do,
Just one moment.
the greatest ad man I ever worked with, Jose Luis, sit right up there. And he kept the weekly afloat probably 3 extra years.
Okay.
Single-handed.
So I will tell a quick story about ad people, which is that, okay, so we have a lot of new startup, like solo content creator, journalists or startup organizations. They're what are replacing the legacy news organizations that have collapsed at some point. We've studied this issue. One of the single greatest barriers for a tiny startup, hyper-local newsroom or content creator is the fact that they cannot hire an advertising or a development person so that they can focus on doing journalism or running the business while the ad person is going out and trying to drum up ad business. Because a lot of journalists go with this whole proprietorship discover that like, well, you have to like go to community businesses and get them to support your journalism, but that's time you're not spending doing the journalism, and so the audience doesn't care about you when you're not in front of them. So that is actually one of the biggest obstacles toward creating jobs that have been lost.
We have a great question here from the audience. And I think we could probably take the rest of the evening discussing the dimensions of this, but your quick thoughts, each of you. Hot takes, if you will. What do you think builds trust with people? How do you get people to think of you as someone who cares enough about you so that you can give them facts?
I'll start on this one. Well, I mean, on platforms and social media, it seems pretty clear to me, which is showing people that you're an actual person. It's kind of a reversal from 20th century media where you would maybe go in a TV studio and you're wearing a suit and a tie and you're looking very formal and business-like and presentable. It's almost the complete opposite when you're on social media, which is that people see your living room. It's a little bit messy and like you're dressed like a normal person. You're talking like a normal person. It's very casual and it seems honest. And if you're telling people about your personal life, this creates a very sympathetic feeling in people. I should be clear that I'm a little bit skeptical of this dynamic because I'm somebody who's online a lot and I like post about my life a lot, but as a journalist, I want to believe that the way that I create trust is by being accurate and so painfully accurate that I will very publicly and embarrassingly post a correction when I've gotten something wrong, because I think that that, conveys to people that if I have said something wrong, you're going to see me correcting and apologizing if I've gotten it wrong, which most people don't do on social media. But there's actually some studies showing mixed results of that, that if people see news outlets making corrections, they actually think the news outlet's like more untrustworthy, which is like the complete opposite that should be happening. It should be showing that this is a serious thing. So this stuff is hard, but that's what I want to believe.
All right, so the theme is building and restoring trust. So you can share information and have people believe it.
Look, I think the biggest problem we have in this country is just about everything is lack of talent.
Say again,
A lack of tolerance
and.
is a big issue that we probably have in our country right now. It's, you're red on blue, you're black on white, just across the board, people make their mind up about, other people, professions, what's happening. If you look at the shooting situation, man, 10 minutes after it happened, there were people saying, well, it was this kind of person who did it. We lack tolerance. You have to be open to giving people a chance. We're not open as a society anymore. We are closed off, or we've made our mind up that because you don't agree with me, we're done, we're separated. We can't even talk to each other. So I think we have to get back to tolerance, and that tolerance will then allow trust to be built. I have won over critics, and I don't know how many times people have called me or emailed me a letter criticizing something I wrote that starts with, I know you won't publish this. So I published it. And I published the line, I know you won't publish this. Right? But, and I'll run it word for word. And sometimes it's insulting. But guess what? I know what's true, I know what's not true. But when we give voice to people who feel like they don't have a voice, you begin to build up that trust, because now they feel like I can be heard with this person. So I think, and I'm sorry for being a little long-winded, I think a lot of times journalists, and I'm gonna say new media journalists, we have to get away from, I disagree with what that person is saying, so they can't have a voice here. You have to give everybody a chance to be heard. Now, of course, there's sometimes when people are extreme and you have to tell them, there's no way in the world we're running that. But even with that person, you say, if you tone this down, this down, this down, and this down, send it back to me.
So is Reddit, just to pick one example, a place where dialogue is facilitated because it's not algorithmic? Or is it a place where everybody just talks to the people that already agree with them on their subreddit? Or maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I think what's interesting about a platform like Reddit, if you're not familiar with the platform, is, basically you join a community page that's about one singular issue. So there's a Pasadena Reddit, and it's all things Pasadena, and people go in with hot takes. And people have differing, opinions, and sometimes, people share views, that sort of thing. So I think if I were to pick one platform that I think, is more conducive to dialogue, I probably would say a Reddit. I think is a good platform for that. And I did, just to kind of, back up a little bit in terms of, how we actually build trust. It's funny that the online guy is going to say this, but I think, building relationships offline is super important. Like what we're doing today, like actually getting to know your neighbors. Gen Zers like to say this thing that's, saying touch grass, get outside and be out in the real world and actually have these conversations. So I think that is a big part. And I think, to add on to that, I think there's been a big rise of what's called like a news influencer, which are people that, people are going to get their news. These aren't reporters. These are just normal folks that started making videos in their living room, using their cell phone, or, using platforms like Twitch, which, started off as a video game platform where you could watch people game. But then now it's become a place where a lot of people are getting their news, and it's because people are building relationships. They're being authentic. It feels a little less stuffy. So I think, that relationship building piece is so crucial.
And we are the government, you can trust us. I get that all the time. Conspiracy theorists, I get that all the time. But I agree, it's all about communication, and I have a small staff. I encourage him, go out in the field a couple times a week, go meet people. Don't hide behind a computer. I welcome phone calls. I welcome open dialogue, especially during COVID. People call me yelling and screaming, and to me, it was like a challenge to kind of talk them down and explain the situation. In most cases, that does work. Some cases, after 20 minutes, I hang up, but to me, it's a challenge, to try to talk through it, whether it's in person, whether it's on the phone, but to respond back and forth via, social media platforms is not real productive, in my opinion, but I'm old school. So I like that open communication to try to talk through whatever, trust issues and or questions that people would typically hide behind their social media platforms.
Let me, shift the topic a little bit to proactive versus reactive. Long before, today's world, the poet said, lies are halfway around the world before truth gets its boots on. And so that's not. But now, lies are 3 times around the world before truth is done. And so, you can spend all your time trying to correct misinformation. How to get out ahead of it so that, instead of chasing people, the ideas that people have got in their head, they're getting, a steady stream of interesting, timely, reliable information. I know there was a tremendous amount of gratitude to the things that we posted right after the fires. Can I drink the water? Can I breathe the air? Can I go back in my house? And sometimes the answer was, we don't know. Or this is what we know, but this is what we don't know. What are the ways in which we can be more proactive and less reactive to the noise?
Yeah, but I
I
was
think-
to say that.
I was joking, I'm the first to be asked, but the last to know, because until a camera shows up or we get the phone call, sometimes they don't think about communications as key and should be priority, so a lot of times it's catch up, and to no fault of others, I keep reminding, but we'll get there. When I worked for the fire department for 16 years, those structure fires are easy to put out. The political fires now, the last 6 years, they take a while to put out. So you have to be strategic. A lot of it has to go through our legal review for things that we say. A lot of it, we want to ensure our council members are aware before it hits the public or the media, because the last thing we want is for them to be caught off guard. So, that's the bigger picture. It's trying to be, I like to be proactive, and we do with things that we can. These immigration raids lately, allegedly there were a few today that I heard about it from media. They called me and they asked me, and I'm not aware, and we can't confirm because we don't know. We did not receive any calls to the police department. So that's an example of, we can't be proactive. We have to be reactive to something like that. But as often as we can be proactive, I'm a big proponent of that. And even if the truth hurts, we need to put information out there, just so that the public is aware of it.
I think that, we have another written extra responsibility, and sometimes we get stories where we have to call a council member and say, we're about to report this, so that you're aware. Or we have to call city government and say, we're about to report this, so that you're aware of what's about to happen, in the city. It's not just, I've never played gotcha journalism in my life, ever. And I think when we do that, that erodes trust. I think trust is built. There are times when I have put on our social media, Pastor and I will report a major breaking news story at 1 o'clock today. Stay tuned. To let people know something is going on. Sometimes we talk one paragraph at a time and say, hey, we're working on this. Stay with us. That allows people to learn as we learn. And then they feel involved. In the news, a story is a breathing, growing thing. What I know at 2 o'clock, I'm gonna change by 4 o'clock. And what I know at 2 o'clock may be entirely wrong at 4 o'clock. And I have to go back and correct it or fix it. I don't get caught up in, if we correct ourselves, we're embarrassed. I mean, we do thousands and thousands of words a day. They're not all gonna be correct. It's just, it's a numbers game. They're not. But when somebody points out, sometimes it's the city, sometimes it's a council member that, hey, this is incorrect. We update the story and we fix it. I don't lose any pay if I fix the story. So I think it's reactive when we are sitting online all day, as Lisa said, going back and forth with somebody trying to prove a point.
Mhm.
I write news stories. I'm not debating you over what happened in council. If it happened, if it was a vote a certain way and you went, well, so-and-so, they go, so-and-so is on the take by developers. What do you want me to do about it? File a complaint, call the DA, or prove it to me better yet. And then I can do something with it. But I'm not gonna sit here and go, yes, he is, no, he's not. I'm gonna go, I'm busy, and they don't pay me enough to listen to you this way. So, I think it's doing our job at the same time, not being afraid to correct ourselves, but bring in others.
That's a segue to another, thoughtful comment that I think everybody could weigh in here. To what extent do you partner with hobbyist news commentators, Nextdoor, Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, to, cross-source, it looks like, because I don't have my reading glasses on, crowdsource, excuse me, local news? Has this been an effective way of improving engagement? How do you hedge against the risk posed by unprofessional hobbyist journalism? So what's the interaction between the vast cacophony of people out there spewing opinions, facts? There were some fire engines on my street today.
Right.
What's the interaction between that ecosystem and those who are trying to?
The two things that don't exist, an activist journalist and a hobbyist journalist. Well, I'm not a journalist. Either you're a journalist or you're not. And yes, I'm a purist. And I'm a snob. And I'm losing, and that's just how it goes. This is how I make my money. It's how I feed my family. Either you are or you're not. You're not the mayor and the secretary. You're the mayor. So there's no such thing as, I am a hobbyist. I sculpt as a hobby.
You what?
I sculpt as a hobby.
Yeah.
I've never made a dime on it. Honestly, it's a hobby. I recognize it as a hobby. I make my money as a journalist. Period. That's what I do. So I am protective of my field, and anybody who does anything should take a certain amount of pride in it if it's the career they've chosen.
Fair enough.
So just as you take pride in blocking stop counting at 5,000, that's amazing. But you take pride in that, you should. But my point is that we've allowed these terms to be created. I'm a hobbyist journalist. Okay, I'm a hobbyist model.
So first, raise that question. I want to specify that I'm less interested in the semantics. I see
Sure.
your point about tourism. What I'm more interested in, the reality is that there's so much engagement about what happens in our community or in our country that happens between Redditors interacting with each other or neighbors interacting on Nextdoor. And so my question is really more about
How I interact with those platforms.
if exactly what you're speaking about. Somebody, Elizabeth Sassler, random name
Okay.
writing, doesn't have the same degree of professionalism in how I would approach sourcing appropriate resources. So how do you work with?
If somebody writes something on Reddit, I don't know if it's true. If I don't know if it's true, I don't print it. That's all it comes down to. If you say it to me and you can prove it, or you say it to me and it's a quote that does not contain libel, then I look at it and I see if it's worthy of print. But I look at Nextdoor and Reddit and those things all the time. People send me links and I do look at them. And they have led to stories, but they've led to stories that I've assigned other journalists, like Eddie Rivera, who's sitting back there with his head down. But I assigned them to other journalists. Kevin Urich, who I worked for at the Weekly, we couldn't take stuff like that to him and say, hey, there's this really great story on Facebook. He would go, if you want to play with your Facebook, go home. We're a newspaper. So the semantics count, but they don't discount your point.
Can I file a dissenting report here?
My man, you're free to say whatever you want.
Well, to be clear, I'm also like personally a bit of a snob, but, so I will say that there are, some community news organizations out there that have been experimenting with content creator partnerships. And I was actually just reading about a local news mapping project that one of these community news organizations have done, I think in the city of Pittsburgh, where what they did was they actually tried to like geographically map for the city's neighborhoods the content creators, not journalists or not self-described journalists necessarily, but the content creators who are sort of popular at, creating whatever content around the city. And maybe it's like people who like to hike or go to the city parks or like to bird or whatever. And those sorts of community news organizations have been looking at those folks and thinking like, these people have their own local audiences in the city. They have their own sort of fans and loyalists who may not be the fans and loyalists of the community news organization. So those organizations have been talking about forming partnerships with those creators, maybe as a sort of like distribution network or somebody they can partner with and try to collaborate with so that you can penetrate the fog of content and reach new people or connect with their audiences. But there are, like, that is a trend that I am seeing
Right.
happen out
But you
there.
know why they want to do it? Because it's free. And they're cheap.
Yes,
And you and I both know that newspapers are cheap. Anytime they can make $1 out of 15 cents, they will do it. They will go and get that free thing, or they will hire a whole bunch of interns in the summer and not pay them. Because it's free and easy slave labor. If they could hire more journalists, they wouldn't go to Reddit. They would hire the journalists. But just hang on. I promise you I'll let you disagree with me in 1 second. But you made a very interesting point. I do agree with. I do think that I do think that content creators, I do think that those sites carry a valuable voice for community. I really do. I think during the fire, I think during elections, any number of stories, these places are very valuable. My only point is, it's just not journalism. That's the only point I'm making, is that, and I've said this because we have a number of local bloggers and sites and things where people have sprung up and proclaimed themselves journalists. No occasion I was at the Weekly with one of these people. We ended the board for libel.
Semantics, let's move on.
Uh-huh,
Thank you.
you're welcome,
Peace.
but I got. So,
Good lucky.
okay, but if you wanna come up here and get the mic,
Your point of terms, got it.
okay, but you know what? Hang on,
Pro.
what's your name?
You're a pro.
What's your name?
Look, can we move on?
No, what's your name?
Right,
Don't interrupt me when I'm talking, Brian. I got the mic.
don't waste my time.
Then leave. You can bounce anytime you want.
Oh,
You've had a lot of time.
let's just hold.
I've listened patiently.
Well, you can be as patient or as impatient as you want, but you don't censor me when I'm talking.
I actually agree with it.
It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree.
This
Gentlemen, now we're taking everybody's time.
This journalism soapbox are
Okay.
nuts.
Well, you're
Ryan,
here
you
for
made your
journalists.
point, Ryan, you made
I'm
your
not a
point.
journalist. I'm a citizen.
So am I.
Concerned citizen.
So am I.
So let's talk issues.
We are talking issues.
Let's, he's got the mic,
Does it
you
really
made your
matter
point.
if you're a journalist or you're a concerned citizen posting information?
Is that a
Is
question?
that what we're doing? Is that what we're trying to find?
Somebody else answer his question.
I don't have.
Okay, here's what,
She had a really good point.
Can I answer it?
That's it. Listen.
okay, we're about to open it up. I want to ask one more question.
Sure.
now. And that is, what is, I had hoped to have more folks who are not plugged in than we have. No disrespect to anyone here. God love you for caring about this issue and being informed. But I was hoping I would trick some people into coming who are less informed, who might want to get more informed. I don't think we have very many of those folks in our audience here tonight, out of the 20,000 people who live in District 2. So these are by and large the folks who actually care about this issue already and are informed. What is one thing you would suggest they do to help raise the level of discourse and information in our community, what could they do? Is it go to the advertisers for Pasadena Now? Is it join the Pasadena Reddit? Is it sign up for, something with Pasadena? What's one thing that these folks can do to help strengthen the local ecosystem of an informed public?
I think they can do it right, just voice their opinion, not be afraid to speak up and speak out. I think that's all it's helping.
That was very gracious. Matt? And I agree with you.
Well, I would love to persuade you all to spend more money on journalism. No, look, I mean, okay, so I'm the guy here who comes and says that it's a good idea to create public subsidies for journalism because there's a market failure, yada, yada, and I believe all that. But what I also believe is that, you have to want quality information. Like, you have to care that words have meaning. You have to care that information is correct. You have to care that the government is responsive to your concerns and factual problems. Because I could scream into the void at the top of my lungs and do all the work in the world to try to bring you the best stuff possible. If you don't want it, then I have been a waste to society. So, I mean, I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, because the people who show up to a civic forum to hear about journalism are probably already, consuming it and likely to be paying for it, and I think a lot of you raised your hands if you were. So, tell your friends. But no, I think that.
More importantly, tell your neighbors.
Tell your neighbors.
Be your friends.
Yes, may not be your friends. No, but I honestly think, we need to have a public that wants really good stuff, and we need to have a public that's dissatisfied with lies.
Victor, Lisa, before we turn to the audience.
Can I ask, not putting anyone on the spot, how many of you follow us on social media, Instagram? Oh, excellent, okay. And I want to get back to the old, during COVID, it was, stay away, don't talk to anybody. Then, with the fires and everybody came together to help neighbors, help a neighbor. I want to get back to that, so whether it be community meetings to where we can get information out. But call me, if you have any suggestions, please, I'm open to any suggestions you have to get information out, to help you and your neighbors.
Yeah, I think my suggestion would be, we're all trusted messengers to somebody. Making sure that, we're sharing information that's responsible, that's factual. In the immigration movement, there's this guideline that says power, not panic, particularly when sharing news about immigration. And I think that's a good framework, right? So sharing information that is empowering people and not just creating panic, right? Or rumbling feathers, but making sure that we're being responsible consumers and also sharing responsibly.
All right, you don't have to ask a question. You can make a comment, but the only thing I will ask you is to be brief, just so we can have more dialogue. So if anyone want to, go ahead. Yes, and you can stand up and, unfortunately, the microphone won't reach. Repeat the question if you can be heard.
Great.
Good.
Um.
And your name?
You took Brenda, Ryan, I've seen you at my doorstep many times after I had a baby at 40 years old, and I really appreciated you coming to the door, when I asked people I appreciate you, of course. I grew up in Chicago, so it's a strong newspaper town. We had the business and the arts, and my dad raised us on the paper. I've done the arts in LA the last 20 years. And I'm of the generation that has watched all the critics that I loved, all their jobs go away and these things. So I'm very passionate about, my longtime friend Cheryl Turner is local news Pasadena.
Yes, and I have failed to mention local news at once.
I've known Cheryl for almost 2 decades, and I appreciate her truth and honesty, and I think with truth and honesty comes accountability. Which your thing that you keep bringing up tonight is how do we get to the rest of the people? Where are the rest
people. And what I have seen as a new mother is a lot of underground things happening in the city. This last year, I am a plaintiff in the lawsuit with the Altadena Tenants Union and the Pasadena Tenants Union. We succeeded with Altadena, and the apartments that are still standing are getting cleaned. We now have to go into litigation with Pasadena because we're being told,
Let's kind of focus on
Yeah.
tourism.
but my question of this is, not a lot of newspapers are covering a lot of the questions that we're asking public officials. And so that to me is my point leading up to it is, if we as a community of renters or whatever the case may be, come to public officials and make phone calls and speak. I'm very big in social media too, and nobody wants to cover it. They don't want to ruffle feathers. How do we bridge the gap between accountability when we are speaking as constituents if it doesn't want to get covered? That's when it goes.
I'll give you Andre the first shot at
I think a lot of people still remind you that sometimes they don't know what's going on, you have to listen. Since you know about a meeting, calls on the phone and say, hey, this issue is happening. Give that from.
that. Yes. And speak up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Scott, and I'm a retired, immunologist and vaccinologist. And so from my personal experience, and both as a vaccinologist and also involved in climate change, one can see a lot of disinformation in those two areas that really, undermine, I think, civility almost, in some respect. And I'm wondering, you mentioned, how, to support the truth and to avoid the lies. But a lot of people are believing a lot of what are scientifically proven facts, and they're believing the lies. And so what do we do about disinformation, I would say?
Scientific issues are such an interesting case because I'm 40 years old, and I feel like I've spent most of my life actually, like, one of the major stories of media in my lifetime have been major disagreements over what many people have felt were basic issues of scientific fact. Climate change, more recently to issues of vaccination. There was an announcement from the White House this week about Tylenol being linked to autism, which from what I understand is not. So that's challenging, and actually sort of looping in with the previous question about, for example, the tenants union involved in litigation. So from the reporter's perspective, like, one of the things that's challenging about these situations is that the kind of journalists who would write about these situations are often not topic experts. Like, you don't have a PhD in, biochemistry, or, you may not be super read in on the civil code about, landlord obligations for little treatment. So, for a lot of the history of journalism, the way the daily newspapers view this is that, like, they phone one side, they phone the other side, and they break the quotes next to each other, and that was kind of like a minimal, safe way to treat the issues, which a lot of people are like, that's not good enough, because one of these sides is totally lying and not correct. But, like, if you're a journalist, coming back to the production problem, like, it takes a lot of time to independently vet the claims and the allocations. Like, you're saying that the other side is lying or saying something untrue or it's broken the law, like, that puts you at risk of libel if you print that stuff. And so it takes work to, like, really run down that stuff, here's a good story about it. And, like, coming back to me, that's, like, one of the reasons why I argue for public subsidies and just having more journalists, which is that, like, it takes a lot of freaking time to, like, check the people out and, like, look at the evidence and try to come up with an independent assessment of whether the thing that somebody is saying is true or not true. And that's the challenge on the journalist side of things, because,
But
like,
you also have your reliable research, don't you?
we do, but, to the point of, like, you know, maybe we used to work in a newsroom of 1,300 people that is now 200 journalists. That's the LA Times.
We have lots more questions. We try to wind these up in an hour and a half. We've already lost a couple of folks. I'm gonna give Cheryl an opportunity to think about it for a 1-minute commercial for local news Pasadena. And, the show is a journalist, and I'm gonna give her the floor for a minute. And then, we'll wind up. I just want to share a couple of things, and then we'll be, sending you all to finish up our meeting histories.
Hey, so I'm a reporter. I've been a reporter for about 20 years. I just started writing a newsletter, so I have to kind of build up that trust again.
What's it called?
Called the LA Reporter,
Nice.
and I have to, put out something for it. Okay, that's important. But on the tenant issue, I think part of it is, I've noticed, I think a lot of you have talked about the fact that people need to want complicated, hard information. But when I have interviewed a lot of people who are tenants, especially the people who are more involved, they keep telling me, I wish more people knew about rent control. I wish more people knew about how the law worked. And so knowing that, I also wish that new people spend more time becoming experts, because I know that I see a lot of reporters out there becoming experts on fires, and how the police work. And, I'm always at some press conference and there's reporters going, I know about this thing, about how the helicopter struck this and this. I constantly have to hear them talking about the details and the expertise that they have. I don't really understand why tenant issues and things that matter to people can't be just a focus.
All right, so Cheryl? Cheryl does journalism as a labor of love.
Thank you. I didn't expect to have a mic tonight, but, I'm Cheryl Turner. I'm publisher of localnewspasadena.com, and, we formed a nonprofit to save local news, the day that we shut down for COVID. That was March of 2020. We gave away a lot of money. We got some cash, gave some to Andrew, Andre rather, gave some to Andre, and a lot of different organizations in town. Because we knew that the advertising was gonna dry up, so we tried to help them stay afloat a little bit. But then whenever we, went to go get some more money, people said, well, we can aware, I'm gonna need you to give it away. So why don't you write something? Why don't you make some news so that then we can give you money if you're writing news. So we started doing that 2 years ago, and now we have 11 Southern California journalism awards. We have 12 writers, and all of these issues that you've raised tonight, we've experienced. And I think maybe the one I wanted to talk about the most is building that trust, because I can't tell you how many Republicans I call and say, hey, I'm doing this story, can I get a comment from you? No, they won't talk to me. So I've had to, during the last political season, I did 30 interviews, 30 different candidates. And there may be 7 of them were Republicans who were willing to talk to me and go on the record. And I wasn't writing bad stuff. I was just writing their platforms, giving out information to the voters. And so I think that's just kind of been our experience in the last 2 years, is that we just don't have enough trust, tolerance, like it goes back to the panel talking about tolerance, and I think it's great to see that.
So how do people sign up for local news Pasadena?
It's localnewspasadena.com. And it's free.
Pop up on the front page.
It's free. There's no advertising. Although we're working on an advertising model for another site, but right now you're getting all of your Pasadena information for
Ryan? Local news Pasadena.
So, if I may, I apologize for the direction. You have the block. I really appreciate you all being here. You did a great job. Don't worry about that. But I also want to, I'm going to before. You said the word tolerance, and I think that is a big part of it. You hit it right now, you said truth. And tying into your other point, I remember you said, half the world doesn't listen, half the world's listening, the other half isn't. They automatically believe it's not true. And like you just mentioned, half the world thought President Trump died a month ago. Like, what is happening? Half the world thought Biden was cognitive for 4 years. And he wasn't, okay? He wasn't. And please, I'm not trying to make. No, but what I'm saying is, so in Matt, excellent job. Now I understand what's happening with local news and what's dying and how Google's, doing their thing. But media also is killing themselves by the line over and over and over. Not you guys, but that's, I'm not putting fingers at you for sure. But the industry said President Trump died for 48 hours. For 4 years, they said our president was healthy. That's lying. You understand? So the truth past that. So you're hurting yourselves too.
You know the other problem?
What's that?
You know the other problem?
Tell me.
What we just did.
Yeah, yes, no.
No, that's the problem. And that people can't have just civil conversation when they disagree. You know what? I agree with what you said, in that we are shooting ourselves in the foot a lot. Because, no, a lot. I'm gonna tell you a lot, because I'll say this, I can't watch Fox News, but now I can watch CNN.
Yeah.
So where do I go for my news?
Yes.
Can I jump in?
And I'm gonna take the microphone back because we actually could be here all night.
I do think that because of the information environment that we all live in. So the mass media that we all grew up with, and I shouldn't say we all, but I grew up with, and many of you grew up with in the 20th century, were products of artificial scarcity. So a lot of the local newspapers were regional advertising monopolies. They have driven alternative businesses out of business. Television, there's a limited amount of broadcast spectrum space. The whole thing going on with the FCC right now is actually the whole reason we have regulations on broadcast is because everyone couldn't have their broadcast station to broadcast their side of the story, which is what everybody wanted in the 1920s. The technology was first invented. It's just that now we have the technology to do that. I do think, and the thing that I don't have a solution for is that I do think we can all basically live with the information sources of our choice. And previously, we were all sort of forced to consume the same stuff. I don't think that's coming back. And so that's the part that I don't know how to solve, which is that the other side that's the one information source that we all have to listen to, like that thing that's not happening anymore. The conservatives have Fox and Newsmax, the liberals have MSNBC and everybody else, et cetera. That's how it's gonna be.
Three quick things, and then I'm gonna let you go, but the panelists, I'm sure, will be delighted to engage afterwards. Number one, those 5,000 doors I knocked on. I was deeply apprehensive. I had done this before when I ran 40 years ago. And now 40 years later, I was gonna knock on doors in this polarized era. And I thought, I'm gonna have a lot of doors slammed in my face. I can tell you to a moral certainty, I had less than 5 politically unpleasant experiences at the door.
Wow.
I had some people who were mad at me because I interrupted their Zoom call. I had some people mad at me because I set their dogs to barking. I had some people mad at me because they didn't want me on my property. Didn't you see the no soliciting sign? But less than 5 people who yelled at me because they disagreed with me politically. I think in 3 cases, they were people who thought if I was not a Trump supporter, then it wasn't worth talking to me. And one person who said, "You look like a Republican, get off of my territory." No. So like 3 or 4 people out of 5,000. That's incredibly heartening to me. Also incredibly heartening to me are a couple of people in our audience, Jill and Diane, who I know, who disagree with me on probably 75% of the things I believe in, either locally or nationally. But who we've had for years in Diane's case, and since I knocked on her door in Neil's case, thoughtful, respectful conversations that continue to this day. And that is what we desperately need in our society. Because I have strong views. Diane, I know, has strong views. Jill's expressed strong views. Many of you have strong views, and that's okay. It's America. We live in a democracy, and it's important that we not kill each other. But it's also important that we listen to each other, right? That's a low bar, not kill each other. It's a higher bar to actually listen to each other. And so that's one thing I would like everyone to go out of here. We had an issue forum on the issue of the ice raids. And that was not an easy conversation to have. But we had that conversation and we're gonna have more. Last thing is, again, this is the choir. So please go out and preach to the unconverted, right? Your neighbors. Say, hey, do you ever log on to Pasadena Now? Because they're really good sources to find out about what's going on in Pasadena. Have you ever heard of Local News Pasadena? It's a free website. You can not just get information about what's happening in City Hall, but some interesting cultural and artistic stuff. Encourage younger people, neighbors, friends to pay attention and not wait until the next 100-mile-an-hour firestorm that burns down half of our community. Then suddenly everybody wants to know, where do I find information, right? Because they're not plugged in to anything local. So go out and do some conversion work. Go out and bring some people. That's a great idea. I will absolutely put some of these links to actually give people, and of course, you can always sign up for my Instagram. My Facebook. And my email list. I do try to provide timely and useful information. This is my second time doing this. This is a far more rewarding experience. Not because the first time I did it, it wasn't rewarding. Judy Kent, who was my assistant when I was mayor of the city, and you know, we had some hard times, some difficult times. What's really rewarding this time is because I get to pay it forward. I just appointed Elizabeth to the Historic Preservation Commission.
Oh, wow.
And I had to explain to someone who had far more credentials and experience why I was selecting her. Because I want the next generations, plural, to begin to be plugged into our community, because this town matters.
That's right.
There's and maybe every town matters. When there was a newspaper in the Midwest that said, the only newspaper in America that cares about Mapleville, Illinois, right? But Pasadena matters. This is an amazing town, and it's an amazing town because of people being plugged in and volunteering and enriching this community. And we should be a model for civil discourse and for finding common ground and for solving some of our problems and for making sure that the next generation of Pasadenans are equally committed as all of you. So thank you all for coming tonight. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.